down into Puget Sound. It truly is a beautiful location and a great spot to visit. I hope every Washingtonian has the opportunity to visit Moran State Park someday. It was one of our first state parks, and it's truly a gem for all of us to enjoy. Moran State Park is truly one of my favorite places. Well, today we're right here in the center part of our state, in a little place called Beverly, Washington, where the mighty Columbia River flows below the dam advantage, and it's a beautiful, beautiful day. You know, in 1981, the legislature had a unique opportunity to purchase the old Milwaukee Road right-of-way all the way across our state from Teco, Washington to North Bend at the top of the Cascades. The legislature made that move. It was controversial at the time, but they made the purchase. And ever since then, they've been working towards a cross-state trail. And the railroad bridge is now reconditioned and reconserved for the use of the general public as part of the Cascades to Palouse Trail. You can walk it, you can ride a bicycle on it, you can travel it, you can see it. It's probably the most majestic, beautiful part of the central Washington hills and valleys. Come and enjoy it. In these beautiful hills of central and eastern Washington, this is an opportunity for each and every one of us as Washingtonians. Well, this trail and this bridge are certainly one of my favorite places.
I'm Laura Jenkins, Speaker of the House, and with me is Joe Fitzgibbon, our Majority Leader, and Monica Stonier, our Floor Leader. So we'll be happy to answer questions. Just a couple comments to start us off. So we're just in the middle of week 7, so we've got opposite House policy cutoff tomorrow. We've already been working really hard. It's a really compressed time to move Senate bills out of committee, and happy that we've moved quite a few, I think, really important ones, both the Senate and us, out of committee, including the face mask bill, the access to abortion medication bill that was Senator Bateman's, and the use of mobile devices in schools bill from Senator Leas. And then I think scheduled to either today or tomorrow, we have the driver privacy bill, the personal safety and data protections in certain spaces bill from Senator Hansen. And this morning we heard the tax, and we're planning to move that out of committee on Friday. Also, as you know, our supplemental budget has been rolled out. Majority Leader Fitzgibbon's here, and he can, I think, answer specific questions on the budget since he's been part of our budget team all along. I think what you'll see in our budget as a general rule is that we've honed to the same priorities that we had last year, which is making sure we're doing everything we can on the fundamentals for Washingtonians: food, shelter, and healthcare, amongst the most important kind of basic services that we're trying to make sure that we protect for Washingtonians, which is very challenging not having a federal partner at all to help us on these things. We also want to make sure that we've got continuity of government happening, just in terms of making sure that people can rely on government and non-government services continuing to try and help them. So as many of you probably saw, this morning we had a hearing on the millionaires tax in our House Finance Committee. So we've got a lot of things to do in the next 3 weeks, but we're feeling good and like we're on track to get them done.
Just to be clear, it's really only 2 weeks and 2 days. I'm not planning on being here in 3 weeks. Jamie Peterson, the Senate Majority Leader, and I have my deputy, Senator Munkadingra, along with me. Yeah, we are in a really kind of crazy, fast-moving part of the session. I was happy to be back in House Hearing Room A this morning for the millionaires tax hearing, and really appreciate the attention and organization that the finance chair is bringing to that effort, and glad to be working so collaboratively with our partners in the House on that. We are moving through the House bills quickly. One of my favorite bills, which is the bill that allows us to set up the West Coast Health Collaborative, is that what we call it? Yeah. To make sure that science can decide our vaccination recommendations, is about to pop out of, we have a rules meeting, our first one, already at noon or 12:30 today, right after pro forma. And so that'll come onto the floor calendar, and I imagine we'll be starting to take action on that and other House bills very quickly. We enjoy the collaboration that we have, and it just feels like we're going to be headed for a busy but smooth landing for the session here over the next couple of weeks. With that, I think happy to take questions from you all.
Senator Dan, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
I'm curious about the allegations of fraud on the consignants for a few of the Senate and House millionaires tax hearings. Some of the data and supporters of these allegations have claimed that they happened in very rapid succession at very odd hours. And I'm curious if you all have any thoughts about the CAPTCHA verification system and how that is preventative against bots, and if it did get kind of overridden by either any sort of AI mechanism or somebody themselves doing it, what that might look like for the future of the system, and if you all just have any thoughts in general on these allegations.
Well, let me just start off by saying I think, every solution brings a new challenge with it. So one of our solutions in doing remote sign-ins and remote testimony has really brought more Washingtonians to be able to be present in hearings, to be able to testify. We like that, and we are very proud of that. When the system is misused in the way that it's alleged to have been misused in this situation, it creates a challenge for us. And I don't think we're at all at an kind of end point of our investigation of what happened in this situation. But that's something that we will likely do over the interim, see if there are tweaks to the system that we need to do to make sure that the sign-ins are as accurate as possible. But the one thing we want to make sure we're counterbalancing against, we don't want to exclude Washingtonians from being able to sign in and to be able to testify on legislation. That's been a huge benefit, and potentially the only benefit any of us has seen from COVID. So I think we want to do that. I think the other just watchword is like when people start making kind of gross, very overarching comments about how many people signed in or didn't sign in, on which side. As a general rule, I always warn my members, you shouldn't really pay attention to that kind of dialogue because of the risks of multiple sign-ins and other things like that. But what's most important is that our hearings, and I think you saw this today, having balanced hearings where we're hearing voices from all over the state of Washington coming from different perspectives. And so I think that the hearing did that, and maybe focus less on numbers and more on quality of engagement.
Yeah, and I think our perspective is similar. Senator Dingra is likely to lead the Facilities and Operations Committee in the Senate to take a look at what we might change in the future. But I think, as the Speaker said, there is a real tension between trying to lock that down and make sure that it's exactly the person who said that they were signing in, and really wanting to have a very low barrier way for people in the public to be able to participate in our process. And I agree that the main antidote to this is just to take with a grain of salt the numbers, right? Because they're not intended to have the same level of security as we have with our really outstanding vote by mail system, for example, which is not subject to the same kind of fraud or abuse. And they don't need to be, as long as you take it with that caveat that that's not the system that we built, because we want it to be easy for people to access.
And I'll just add, we have a great LegTech team. So I'm looking forward to what options they have during the interim, and hopefully a solution before next session starts.
Senator Dingra, your bill that would require certain tort claims against the state to go through an arbitration process before they could go to trial was originally scheduled to be held in the House, or there is a hearing on it in the House Judiciary Committee today. That got canceled. I was wondering if you could kind of just give an update on the status of that bill and if you anticipate it still moving forward this session.
I'm going to defer to the House on that one. But I think everyone acknowledges and understands that this is a huge problem for the state that we have to address.
Yeah, and I think, one, my hat's off to Senator Dingra for the work that she's done to move this issue along this session. Issue of kind of a bill of first impression. I think our shared goals are to make sure that anybody who is a victim of childhood sexual abuse or other kinds of misconduct have access to justice. But we have also seen skyrocketing tort claims. So how we find the balance there is something that we'll continue to work with Senator Dingra on, and I think that her bill has moved us along the way, but I don't think, when I talked to the chair of the committee a couple of days ago, just really not in a position to move forward this year. But I think this is work that we'll continue to do collaboratively over the interim, and really, really happy for the work that Senator Dingra has done so far on this.
Do you anticipate any other kind of action on it this session, or is that just for future sessions?
I think it's unlikely that the bill moves more this session.
Wanting to go back to the topic of the bots and the fake sign-ins, I think for a lot of folks watching at home, they probably never even come to Olympia or signed up to testify, and this might all seem like really wonky to them. Can you walk us through what the timeline for discovery was? How did this come to your attention, and what are you doing to address it now in as plain terms as you can explain it to someone that this is just out of their wheelhouse? Like, why does this matter?
I became aware of it because of a complaint that was sent to the chief clerk of the House with some pretty clear evidence of people signed in con to the bill who were in no way con to the bill. Just as an example, Senator Victoria Hunt was signed in as, on behalf of the Senate, as being con. She had actually voted for the bill. She was clear.
And 3 times. Right?
Yes, yes, she was, right. And so that's just one example, but multiple people who were actually pro on the bill. As I said earlier, I don't think we have completed an investigation of exactly what was happening, whether this was bots, whether this was manually done. The complaint that we got suggested a belief that there were that was somehow driven by bots signing in. So those are all things that we're going to have to look at over the interim. We are not going to close down people's ability to sign in and testify on bills, especially at this point. Let's take the interim, make sure we investigate and look at what level of fraud there was in this, and then figure out what the suggestions are and how we move forward.
And is what is happening here, is this unprecedented?
We don't have any, I have never received a complaint about this before. At least I don't believe the chief clerk has. So it's unprecedented in that sense. I think that there are definitely times where there are sign-ins that are not accurate. But it's sometimes hard to know because sometimes people accidentally sign in as pro or con. Sometimes people then realize they've signed in on the wrong side, so then they go in and sign in again in a different way. So there are like honest mistakes that get made too. So I think what we will be looking for as we investigate this more is thematic things that are happening. But what's most important is that people be able, I think, to, well, I mean, there's just no sunlight between what Senator Peterson said and what I'm saying, so I might as well not repeat it. Right? We want people to be able to testify. We want people to be able to engage. And this system was not set up to be like a voting where people count sign-ins as votes. That's not what it was set up to do. So you just have to pay attention to that.
And I'll just add, in the Law and Justice Committee, many times we'll see, 200 people signed in con on a bill that has unanimous support and no one is testifying con, because the title may sound like something that people are against. So I think there is a lot of misinformation and people misunderstand what bills are doing. I don't think everyone who's signing in support or opposition is actually reading the bill. So I think you got to take it for what it's worth. And, I found out about this because Senator Hunt called me because she's like, I don't know who signed me in. I did not sign in con. So that's how I found out Monday morning.
Is there a criminal element here? I mean, could there be a fraud?
Well, I think.
I'll turn to the prosecutor.
What's the purpose, right? It's not like we are making decisions not to pass a bill because of a sign-in when they're not testifying. So normally we take a look at it for information, and that's what it is information. That fraud is not going to personally help anyone financially or in any other way. So, we're not talking about like criminal activity here. It's people trying to give their opinion, and apparently bots are giving their opinions right now. So we'll take it with a grain of salt. But there are many times, in Law and Justice, I don't know if you've seen Senator Trudeau and I kind of look at each other and we're like, 300 con, not quite sure what they're opposed to. So I think we've seen a little bit of that activity, and I think it is fine for what it is, but we will take a look and make sure at least that you don't have bots that are able to sign in and we actually reflect real humans. That's the goal. But they're not really helping us make decisions in terms of amendments to bills or whether to pass it out of committee or not. We rely on people who actually come and testify in person and other stakeholders in helping with that bill development.
Yeah, and I'll just give you an example of that where this system is used. In the Senate, we have a consent calendar that is designed to be for the bills that are just completely uncontroversial and worked out. They have to have agreement from the chair and ranking member. They have to have been voted unanimously out of committee. They have to have agreement from the majority leader and minority leader. In addition, we say that nobody can have signed in to testify other or con on the bill, right? Because that's an indication that maybe something wasn't worked out and it ought to go through the regular process. We don't, in that process, pay attention to people who sign in but not to testify, because then we don't have any indication whether there was any substance there. So, back to what I said before, you just have to take it for what it was worth to begin, like how was it intended? It's just to be kind of a way for people to weigh in easily and express feelings.
Senator Peterson, I have two questions on this, but can you respond to an allegation that was made, I think, by Tim Eyman during today's hearing and also on social media by Brian Haywood, that you have had phone conversations or otherwise with state Supreme Court justices about how they might decide on the income tax?
I have not.
Have you had any contact or anyone at the table had any direct conversations with state Supreme Court justices about this piece of legislation?
No.
I have not.
No. On the income tax, a lot of the conversation obviously focuses around how much money does the state need? And over the last 10 years, the state budget roughly has ballooned at 3 times the rate of inflation and 9 times the rate of population growth. During that period of time, spending per pupil has doubled. And during that period of time, you guys have passed a multi-billion-dollar tax on capital gains, a multi-billion-dollar carbon tax, and last year the largest tax increase in state history. So can you explain to people why, given all of that, we still need more money?
Well, I guess one thing that I would start by saying is inflation and population growth are not separate. Those you need to be looking at together. In addition, one of the ways to lie with statistics about the budget is not to pay attention to the fact that when we resolved the McCleary litigation, we moved a huge amount of property tax authority from local budgets into the state budget. So there was a fairly dramatic leap in state spending that did not represent a leap in government spending. It just meant that because the Supreme Court had told us that it had to be reliable, regular revenue, we moved it from being property tax revenue that was subject to voters voting at the local level into being property tax revenue that was part of the state school levy. Right? So I think the growth curve is not what it's represented to be then. I will say that we also have been through a period in the early 2020s of fairly substantial inflation that had a disproportionate effect, for example, on labor costs. And the state, like a lot of organizations, is seeing in the cost of providing services some pretty dramatic increases. We are working, I think, all the time, and Representative Fitzgibbon could talk about the House's work on this, on trying to be more efficient in the budget, trying to figure out what we have been doing that we don't need to do anymore. But the basic fact remains that we get the bills essentially from 295 school districts about how much it costs to educate the 1.1 million kids who are in public school. That is our core duty. When they tell us that they have to have so many paraeducators to be able to cover safely a special ed class, and that it costs $26 an hour or whatever for them to be able to staff those classes fully, I mean, that's just kind of the fact of what the costs are. There's not a lot that we can do about that, and that's close to half of our budget just in the K-12 system, right? So, this is in some sense the big question that we are wrestling with all the time, and I think we all welcome thoughts that people have about ways that we could be more efficient in providing the services that people actually want, need, demand from us. We welcome that feedback.
Yeah, and maybe you can answer it in the follow-up. And please correct me if I'm misunderstanding the education issue, because it was a lot of the testimony today in favor of the income tax was from teachers who say, we don't have what we need basically in the class. So the numbers that I've seen show that per pupil in the state on average, we've doubled the amount we're spending per pupil. And then we had the McCleary decision, and also as a percentage of the overall budget, education has actually shrunk. So the budget has grown, education has grown as well. So I guess that's the question I get from people a lot is, how can we say we don't have enough money for school when we're spending twice as much per pupil?
Well, I was going to start with a slightly different topic, but maybe I'll get to that. So I find it helpful when we talk about the sort of the growth in state spending to be less abstract and talk about what are some of those areas where we've seen the big growth. So for example, since the passage of the Fair Start for Kids Act in 2021, we've increased state spending on early learning and childcare by about 10 times. That is a very big increase. And that's also means that many tens of thousands of Washington families have access to childcare who didn't before. Since we passed the Workforce Education Investment Act in 2019, we have seen many tens of thousands of Washington young people access the Washington College Grant for financial aid to our higher education institutions. In 2023, we allowed adults on Medicaid to access dental care, non-emergency dental care. That was a significant investment in the 2023 budget. So I think it, it registers with me to think about what are those actual program areas where we have seen that growth. Some of the growth is in areas that I think are less satisfying. We have to really increase our investments in IT systems because that helps state government be more efficient in the long run and less subject to, down websites or, people not getting unemployment benefits on time, or people having a hard time getting through to, on the phone to somebody at the Department of Retirement Systems to ask about their pension. We have to make those investments because when we don't make them, then the system starts to fall apart. Just like if you don't maintain your roof and it starts to leak, then it costs more in the long run. Of course, as we've already touched on today, right, the very large increase in jury verdict payouts against the state for folks who have been harmed by the state in one way or another that's a very large growth. It's also a growth due to people having proved to a jury that they've been harmed by the state, which I think we would all rather that just had not happened in the first place. But if it does happen, I think we all agree that people are owed their time in court. In education, the largest, really the only real add we made in last year's budget was for special education, Senator Peterson's bill to increase funding for special education. We know that the population of students with special needs in our schools has grown and has grown much faster than the state has supported districts in their ability to hire professionals to work with those kids, so that it's not just the teachers who are having to, provide the extra attention that every kid with special needs has. Those investments do take some time to pay off. I think it was in the 2022 budget, we really increased allocations for school nurses and school counselors. I still hear from parents in my district about, my school still only has a quarter of a nurse or a half a school counselor. Those are things that pay off over time. And I also think that it's important that educators of all kinds and be able to afford to live here. And I think that as a result of the McCleary changes that we made in 2017, we've moved much closer to a place where an educator's salary is a livable salary in more parts of the state, at least, than it was before.
So former Attorney General Rob McKen has laid out why he thinks the income tax bill is unconstitutional, several ways, but among those is the violation of the uniformity clause. So do legislators have a responsibility to propose bills that are constitutional, or is it your job to push that envelope?
So happily, the former Attorney General is not a member of the Supreme Court. And ultimately, it's 9 people on the Supreme Court who are going to make the decision about whether it's constitutional or not. Look, there was a decision in 1933 by 5-4 majority at a time when the income tax, the idea of income tax in our country was only at the age of majority, 18 years since the federal income tax had started, when there was a lot of unsettledness about the nature of an income tax. In the law up to that time, there was an idea that there were essentially 2 kinds of taxes: property taxes, taxes on having something, owning it, and excise taxes, taxes on doing something. right?
Do people not own
And
their income, though?
No, I think it is, no, they own the property. Once it has become income, this is not, if you think about it, I've been trying to think of good analogies to this. We sometimes have people who come into the United States, right, but they're not considered to have been in the United States because of the legal mechanism by which they got here, right? So there's a question about whether you're lawfully present. It's just an immigration idea. This is maybe makes sense only to lawyers, but income is sort of it's this line at which somebody else's property becomes your property, right? That's income.
If my bank account is mine.
Well, that's right. And before it hits your bank account, it has money withheld out of it, right? So was your gross income your income, or was your net income your income? I mean,
It is mine, but.
well, but let me give you just two very clear examples. So your capital gains income, the Supreme Court decided is not your income, right? Similarly, almost immediately after the state Supreme Court struck down the income tax in 1933, the legislature turned around and passed the gross receipts tax for businesses. And guess what? The business and occupations tax, or the business occupation tax, businesses have to pay on their gross receipts. Now, is that not their property? I mean, honestly, this is what I'm telling you is that in the law since then, there have been a lot of different branches that have gone off. Ours is a dead branch. We are the only place that considers an income tax to be a property tax. Well, people can certainly propose that. But the rest of the world says either that income is a tax on doing something, right? The activity of working at a job or operating a rental property or, fill in the blank. Or it says that it's a third kind of thing, different from property taxes or excise taxes. And ultimately, we're not going to make that decision. The Supreme Court is going to make that decision.
And can I just say, where in the Constitution does it say that income is property?
It doesn't.
I don't have it.
Right,
It doesn't.
It doesn't say that. Where it said that was in a 1932 Supreme Court case, a 5-4 case, Clinton v. Chase. So I don't actually even know where you would amend the Constitution to say that income is not property. It doesn't say that. It was a single Supreme Court case from before anybody in this room was alive on a 5-4 decision that said that income is property, and no other state in the Union nor the federal government considers it to be.
But ours does say that.
But sorry, where does it say that?
Constitution doesn't.
It doesn't say that. There's just a Supreme Court case from 1933.
And I would just note, I appreciate your reference to Attorney General McKenna and his opinion about this. He also had an opinion about capital gains, which turned out to not be the way the court ruled on this. So there can be differences of opinion and desires for the court to actually clarify earlier court rulings. And that's what we expect this court will likely get the chance to do, is to clarify a nearly 100-year-old court ruling. So, what they say about attorneys, 2 attorneys, 3 opinions. We happen to have 3 attorneys up here.
Probably at least 4 opinions.
Yeah, so I, respect Attorney General McKenna's opinion about this. He's probably been right many times and wrong other times, as have many of us on this, but we'll persist forward. The obligation of members is to file legislation. There's no other limiting requirement in rule or statute with regard to what's proposed by members.
Yeah, Representative Fitzgibbon, as a follow-up to that, I think the thing that's hard for people to hear is that their income isn't their property. And so, if I were to cash my check and stash it away in my safe at home, whose property is that?
It's your property. I think there's a legal distinction here between the limitation in the state constitution on how property taxation can happen and how other kinds of taxation can happen. So you might also say, when I if I'm a business and I say, just to pick a business, say I'm a hospital, and the income that they generate from the state of Washington or from insurance companies or from people paying cash, the B&O rate levied on that income is 1.5%. If their revenue were property, we couldn't levy a 1.5% B&O on them. It would have to be 1%. And that's established law, that income by a business, their gross receipts, is not subject to the 1% cap on property taxation. So this is like sort of a legal argument that is hard to make in a political context. Certainly when you make income, you own, what you make, but the legal limitation of 1% on property, as well as the uniformity requirement, does not apply in other areas of taxation. And in 49 states and in the federal government, they understand that legal limitations around property taxation are not applied to income taxation.
I think we had
we
questions.
just have,
We had questions
equal
over
opportunity
here.
to participate.
So I don't want any topic dominating here, but.
There was a workshop done by the Health and Long-Term Care Committee in December, and it just talked about the aging population of Washington State and how the ratio of working class aged people to 85-plus-year-olds is increasing, or that ratio is getting narrower. And I'm curious what kind of work you guys all are doing to prepare for that and the strain that's putting on our long-term care workforce.
This is actually one of the biggest challenges for our workforce writ large. And if you look over the last 5 years, the things that we've done on healthcare compacts, on licensure issues, on things on trying to expand education in particular areas, I would say that we're way beyond the planning phase. We're way into doing work on those things. But I would just note in almost every area, whether it's building trades, whether it's healthcare, whether it's law enforcement officers, what's happening is the baby boomer generation, as it gets older and is leaving the workforce, the following two generations don't have enough people in them necessarily to actually fill those positions that become open because of that. And in the healthcare realm, it's exacerbated because folks who are retiring start to end up needing more services in that realm, right? So demand gets bigger. Our workforce is smaller, so we have to think about every sort of intervention in terms of getting more people in the workforce, but we also have to think about ways that we can help support the workforce and delivery of healthcare services becoming more and more efficient over the years. And I think we're well into trying to do that work, and we're going to have to keep on doing it for quite a number of years.
And I'm sorry.
That's okay. I think in Clark County, up until about 3 years ago, led the state in the per capita long-term care facilities kind of count per capita. And we also, I think, have a responsibility at the state level to empower our communities to act on that. So an example is outside of the legislative work, I try to make sure I'm connecting with our long-term care needs in Southwest Washington and our students who are heading into healthcare fields at like Henrietta Lacks Bioscience High School or Cascadia Tech Academy in Clark County. So doing what we can to kind of match the need and the upcoming workforce with the need that is presented in a community is something we do in a number of areas, but in my area in particular, this is one that, sometimes there's legislation and bills we can pass here or budgets, but other times we can just empower our communities to do what they need to if we have a role in that.
And just very briefly on this, this is a challenge for Washington, but this is actually a less acute challenge for Washington than it is for most states and for most industrialized countries around the world that don't have we have one of the highest birth rates in the nation. We also have one of the highest inward immigration rates from other parts of both the United States and beyond the United States. So because we have a fast-growing population, the problem that Lori described about the two previous generations paying for the current retired generation, this is an extremely acute problem in states that are like like West Virginia that are not growing fast, or in countries like Japan, South Korea, China that are shrinking fast. So we're in better shape than most, also because we've invested in our long-term care workforce. But it remains a challenge for us, but I would rather be us than most of our peers on this.
Jerry, you had a question?
I was just going to go back to your favorite topic, the millionaire's tax. But process-wise, in 3 days, the House Finance Committee will exec a bill. I wonder if Representative Fitzgibbon, what might we see in that bill different than came out of the Senate? And then, because you talked earlier about working collaboratively, walk us through what you anticipate. Is this going to be an agreement to go to conference committee to resolve the differences, or will this play out on the floor?
So I'm not going to get ahead of the Finance Committee members on the specifics, but I will say one thing that we've been pretty clear on for some time is that we expect the number of tax reductions in the bill to increase. So I think you'll see a bill coming out of House Finance with greater tax reductions than the one that they heard this morning, which has been part of our plan all along, was as we got more input as the bill moved through the Senate and the House to sort of identify what would be the tax reductions that would help Washingtonians the most. So I think that's a change that you'll see. You know, beyond that, I think our hope would be to pass a bill off the floor that is something that the Senate could concur on, but we don't want to necessarily presume where all of our members are going to land and what amendments they might choose to vote for. But you know, our goal would be to pass a bill with Finance Committee amendments and then whatever floor amendments we adopt. That's something that the Senate could concur on. But if we need to go to conference, that's an option, but it's probably not our first choice.
The only other thing I'll just add, Jerry, is that I talked to the finance chair last night, and I think that we'll continue to have some like smaller technical, mechanical, and operational amendments to the bill, and I think she and Senator Frame, who's leading in the Senate on this, are working very collaboratively together to make sure that we kind of process through some of those issues that are raised, either in the testimony today or just feedback that we've gotten.
Can I just clarify then, just on the tax reductions, it sounds like you won't. The House Finance Committee might not accept the amended version that repeals an entire tax, the retail sales tax you guys passed last year. Because to do greater tax reductions plus that, won't you basically be giving back almost more money than you're taking in?
We think that there's room to identify some additional tax reductions without moving into a space where we don't have the revenue that we need to balance in 27, 29.
The reductions right now are at about somewhere between 18 and 20% of the revenue from the bill. And we've said consistently 25 to 40% is where we're hoping to get to in terms of the tax reductions. So there's quite a bit of room. I mean, it could, if you just take that math, it could double what the tax reductions are without, and still have 60% of it going to the general fund, right? So
doesn't Senator Leas's amendment that repeals what essentially was 5814, isn't that exceed a couple $2 billion?
No. You're comparing apples and oranges because you're talking about 4-year numbers and not single-year numbers.
Also, so 5814 had multiple parts to it. Senator Leas's amendment repeals effective January 1st, 2030. Essentially the sales tax on services. Well, I shouldn't say that. Part of the sales tax on services, basically what was part one of that bill. And that, so it's not the entire fiscal note on 5814, but it is, I would say it's the aspects of 5814 that we've, heard the most concern about.
And the amount, if you think about it, is roughly, if you think about these in bands, if that's a, I don't know what, 7% band or something like that of the revenue, that's roughly the same as the B&O surcharge that goes away in that year calendar year 2029, right? So about, that wasn't going to be state revenue anyway. That band gets taken up by the sales tax on services. So the House Finance Committee may do something different with that. I'll just say, to go back to your original question, It is absolutely our objective, and that's why the good communication, collaboration that is going on. I get a daily download from Senator Frame about her conversations with Representative Berg. We are absolutely trying to be in lockstep about this. My expectation is that unless something gets pretty dramatically screwed up, probably in a way that none of us would like, we're not going to need to go to conference. We're just going to concur and send the bill on to the governor's desk.
5 minutes left. The last just thing I would note about this, if you look at the section on sales tax on services, that the Leas amendment contained, I would just say we really welcome that, because that contains things that we have heard concerns about from the small business community, from nonprofits, from our school districts, from folks who are doing live performances. So it actually does address a significant bit of feedback that we've gotten from a broad and diverse group of organizations. So we welcome that amendment.
On the tort reform question, can you explain kind of what you think that bill not moving forward would mean for continuing the skyrocketing state liability as well as local governments?
Sorry.
I was just going to say there are things that we can likely do in the budget and work on in the budget, and I'm sure that Senator Dingler has been working on those. But this will be it will be a continued process that will refine over time.
I mean, the single switch you could hit that would reduce those costs a lot would be to cap damages that juries can award a victim. And that's, the Supreme Court's already told us that that's not constitutional in our state. So we absolutely want to and need to bend the curve on those verdicts. And I think Senator Dingler's work sort of provides the sort of roadmap for what that work will look like going forward. We need to do that. We need to try to get alternative processes for resolving these claims in place. But the really large bankable reductions would require doing things that are not constitutional.
Well, and let me give a slightly different perspective on this. In the long run, although of course we want justice for people who have been harmed by the state, we don't want people to get hurt by the state, right? So the real focus of our work has to be on making sure that whether it's the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system, that kids are safe and are taken care of, right? That's going to mean more investments in those facilities, in the people who are staffing those facilities, whether it's the psychologists or the teachers or whatever, the social workers. Those are the kinds of things that we do to prevent injuries that I think are the real answer in the long term to bending the curve on what our liability is.
As the millionaire tax debate continues, it seems like it's probably heading toward a yes vote. Would any of the 5 of you be willing to reassure voters that an income tax on millionaires today will not become an income tax on everyone at a future date? Would any of you be willing to give that reassurance?
Yeah, I mean, what I've said is I don't support that, and my colleagues haven't, not just my colleagues up here, but the colleagues I've talked with in our chamber don't support an income tax on incomes below $1 million. The public certainly doesn't support that, and that's not something that we're going to support. I can't tell you that the legislature 50 years from now will never consider that, but I can tell you that that is not something that we are proposing or supporting.
Like, not just this year, but in next 5 years.
You just have to look at what the Democrats have been doing since they took over the majority. It's about fixing a regressive tax code, in making sure that we are providing the resources and support that the most vulnerable amongst us need. And you can take a look at the last 8 years. That's what we have been doing consistently. And all of us have said over and over again that we want to ensure we're balancing a tax code, which means that people who earn less than $1 million do not pay a tax on the first $1 million. Now, I hope we have a lot more millionaires in the future, but that's not where we are. And then you had a question?
I mean, just to follow up on the tort reform question again. So, I mean, if you're to come back next year and try to make some kind of reforms, are we still only talking about being able to make changes really on the margins? I mean, we're talking about $500 million a year. I mean,
It's very hard to forecast what juries are going to award victims. I think we would like to really both reduce the number of people who are harmed and find ways to resolve these claims earlier in the legal process to reduce those costs. I don't, any amount of cost savings is very helpful to us in balancing the budget. But I think if we're successful, I think this can be a benefit to victims as well as to the state and to state taxpayers. But the claims that are being paid today are in large part for things that happened many decades ago. And I will say that a young person in the juvenile rehabilitation system today is much safer than a young person in the juvenile rehabilitation system in the 60s or 70s when most of these claims arose. And so that is good news, and it also means that we will see, as we work through the people who were harmed when these were less safe places, those I expect they will not continue at this level forever.
On the, one more quick. On the income tax, sorry, the governor's idea for a sales tax holiday, is that still in the running as you guys move toward executive session, or is that ruled out?
We're looking at ideas from the governor, ideas from our members, ideas from the public. We haven't ruled anything out.
And you shouldn't expect that what comes out of the Finance Committee is everything that we're considering.